my name is Amy, and you're with Game Dev London. And today I am with Chris. Chris, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello. I'm Chris Knowles. I've been in the games industry for about 15 years, most of that time at Jagex, doing things like working on the back end of RuneScape. Although for the last 2.5 years or so, I've been an indie developer. So I'm working on my first game, which hopefully will be out next year.
Wonderful. So today we're going to talk about something that's quite exciting for me, actually, because I'm sort of in the middle of university as well. We're going to talk about master's degrees and whether we think they're worth it or not. So how about we talk about your journey into the games industry, Chris?
So I did a degree and I did a master's degree, but none of it was particularly sort of games relevant. So when I was a lad in 2001, when I was picking a degree, there weren't really any game dev courses yet. I think one or two places were talking about it, but it wasn't really an option. So I could have gone and done computer science, but actually I wasn't yet convinced I wanted to do that. So what I did was traditional engineering. So I did a general engineering degree. I know lots of stuff about jet engines I've never had to use, and that kind of thing. But that came as a 4-year course with a master's on the end. Towards the end of my course, I thought, you know what, I should have done computer science. And so my 4th year project was which was like half the final grade, was a big software project. And then after that, after a brief break to go and work for my church for a year, I then joined Jagex, and I was in the industry, although I wasn't actually making games for a couple of years.
Okay, so how about you tell us about what your actual master's project was?
It was a fun thing. So it was all about using sort of 3D tools to interact with computers in a room. So I was working on some software where we had a pen which had some infrared LEDs on it, which could be picked up by lots of different cameras around a room, and it could then work out where you were pointing. The idea being that if you pointed it at this screen over here, it would move the mouse on that screen. When you pointed it at that screen over there, it would move that mouse. And so I was working on a system that would integrate this pre-existing software that just worked out where the pen was in space, and then sort of talk to computers to say, right, you need to move your mouse over here, and getting that working. And there was a guy next to me who was working on a different bit of the system, which had lots and lots of different cameras to cover a huge space and then handing off between them, so that then would work in a big open office and you could carry the thing around with you.
Oh, no, right. So it's sort of like a mouse, but it's not a mouse, but it can work on whatever sort of screen you want it to work on.
And there was sort of the dream of, I might pick up a file on this monitor and drag it through space and drop it on a different monitor, and that would make it transfer the file between the two computers. That was the kind of thing they were thinking of.
Okay, wow. So how did you make that link into your engineering sort of university degree?
Yeah, so the way it worked, I was at Cambridge University, and you start out doing all kinds of engineering. So I had to do like mechanical engineering, structures and all sorts. And the last 2 years you specialize. And I decided what I really liked was kind of software and what they call control theory, which is essentially I've got some sort of device with lots of things I can twiddle. How do I twiddle all those things to make it do the right stuff? So if I've got a chemical plant, how do I change all the dials in the control system to make the right stuff? Or how do I get a jet fighter that flies in a straight line, which is surprisingly hard. It's that kind of engineering, but there's a lot of software goes into that kind of thing.
So what was the software like when you use it? Because software changes all the time. So what was it like? What sort of software did you use?
So it was all kind of quite low level C++.
Yeah.
So there were no sort of frameworks or anything. There was a bit of software that last year's student had written that kind of did some of this stuff. We were kind of building on that, but then we were doing sort of very low level, telling Linux to move the mouse kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it was all very belt and braces.
Okay. So what about before you did your master's, what about your university degree, undergraduate degree? What did you do during that?
Yeah, I mean, it covered all kinds of stuff. So I built, a very small bridge. We did the maths of how boomerangs work. We studied jet engines, power plants. And then I did do one computer science module as a 3rd year engineering student. I was allowed to do a 2nd year computer science module, which is the moment I thought I am in the wrong course, but it's too late to change now.
Wow.
So I learned the stuff about data structures and algorithms, and how Linux inodes work and that kind of thing. That was very cool.
Oh, okay. So you sort of merged the computer science and the engineering together for your masters and made it your own thing. I really like that.
Yeah, I was trying to pick like the most sort of computery things I could get out of what was allowed in this in the engineering degree.
So I imagine that sort of jet engine stuff. Did that relate to anything you were doing? Because that sounds really cool.
It's very cool. I can't remember most of the maths now, but I sort of vaguely remember how they work. It's very cool. It just has no relevance to my career whatsoever, but it was fun to learn about.
Okay.
Yeah.
So leading on to career stuff then. So you said you didn't find it really useful, but are there bits and pieces that you can pick out of your university course that you did find you use day to day, or not really?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that I'd done, I sort of had the time to do a bit of software during my degree rather than just in my spare time probably put me in a slightly better spot for my kind of, the coding sort of stage of the interview I had to do. And, having sort of worked on a project and had to sort of work out what I was doing by myself, I think was kind of useful. But I think that's probably stuff that if you're applying for a graduate position, people probably aren't expecting you to know anyway. So it's perhaps having done a bit of it might be a little bit helpful, but I think employers are kind of understanding that if you're hiring you fresh out of university, you probably haven't got that stuff down anyway.
Right. I think things may be a bit more different these days because there are a lot more games courses.
That's true.
So graduate roles are maybe more aimed towards game dev graduates. So what do you think has changed between someone wanting to do a master's now and someone wanting to do a master's back then?
I mean, I think employers in general, once you've had 2 or 3 years of industrial experience, they're mostly interested in that. What have you actually done in a real job for the last couple of years? So the question really is, does a master's help you get your first job? Because after that, I think it's going to become less relevant. So if you can do something like I spent a year researching task-driven AI for games or something, that probably is actually quite useful. But if it's just, hey, I've got a master's in something, that probably isn't going to sort of push the boat that much. So I don't think my sort of general engineering master's was going to be all that useful. And I enjoyed doing it. I'm glad I did it. It was fun. And if someone wants to do a master's, then sure, I'm not going to tell you not to do a master's. If you think you'll enjoy it, you want to do that kind of project work, then absolutely go and do that. But I think it's going to very much depend on exactly what it is, whether or not that's going to help you get your first job.
Okay. Yeah, because quite a few years ago, it may have helped a bit more to get a master's because the games industry wasn't as big as it was now, and there were people coming from computer science, from other subjects which aren't directly games related. So how about things you have found? So analysis and stuff like that. Have you found the writing stuff that you've done in masters useful? Those skills that you've gotten from doing university in general, have you found them useful in your day-to-day or your job as an indie developer?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's worth pointing out as well that games companies, particularly big games companies, doing online stuff, are going to need software developers who aren't really doing anything which is obviously gamey, in the sense that if you're integrating with a payment provider to do the billing end of things, or you're dealing with like account creation and databases and stuff, a sort of a generic, as you might call it, computer science degree is going to put you in a very good position for that kind of job. And if you've got a master's in that might be useful. But again, that probably, unless it's something super specific that they really need, I don't think the master's is going to help you too much. But if you've got a non-games degree, it doesn't mean that the games industry is suddenly closed to you by any means.
Of course.
So that kind of thing. And actually, I found that not so much my degree stuff, but the work I did at Jagex before I got into doing games. So I worked there about 18 months before I actually moved to a different team and started working on games. And the experience I got in writing software that was nothing to do with games as such, it was all billing stuff, account creation, player support stuff, that influenced the way I've written back-end systems for games since. So
Right. Okay.
dealing with, a profile server where you've got a bunch of events that change, that change someone's state, and maybe not in the middle of a short game of something, but between games, you've gained some XP, you've unlocked a new ability or something, and that's a bunch of events that go in. That actually looks a lot like a billing system where transactions happen and they might get charged back later, and other events come in and you make sure they're all in the right order. So I've written profile systems for games that look a lot like the billing software I used to write.
Yeah.
Because actually that's a fairly sensible approach. It's robust. You deal with setting it up so that if one database goes down, we can use the backup one, and that's all fine. And working in that kind of environment. So doing non-game software was very helpful when I came to do back-end stuff on games that was more obviously games related. So I guess in that sense, yeah, the university stuff was quite generic in terms of it wasn't game software, but it was software experience that, you're always learning something when you're coding.
Of course. So I'm from a programming background and you're from a programming background, but how about the other sort of paths in the games industry? So artists which aren't really sure what they want to do, whether they want to go into film, into games, into animation, do you think a master's is beneficial for them, or 3D modelers, they're sort of artists as well, or because I know some people take masters because they're not so sure what they want to do in the future, so they take this masters to help them sort of create a path. So what do you think about that? Do you think it helps, or do you think it's better to just get into something and then see where that leads you?
So I think, in terms of like sort of getting hired as an artist, I've never had to hire artists, so quite how it works with portfolios and experience and stuff, I'm not hugely well informed on. But in terms of, I suppose, if you're at the stage of thinking, I know what I want to do, and I want to get into this bit of the industry, given that what employers are interested in after a little while is what have you really done. If you can get a job in that area without a master's, I think you probably might as well, because that's actually going to give you, if your master's is a year or whatever, that's going to give you 1 year of industrial experience that someone with a master's won't have. And maybe there is a master's which is like really super tuned to what you want to do. If you want to do, maybe you're doing a master's in sort of some sort of cutting edge rendering system or something, and if you really want to get into like graphics programming, that might be useful. But if you kind of know whatever you want to get into and there's an opportunity there, I think delaying that for a year to get a master's probably isn't worth it. If you think you'd enjoy doing a master's and you want to do some research stuff and you've got the funding and it and it all works, then no harm in it. But I think if you know where you want to go, using a master's as a sort of you could put it slightly negatively as a delaying tactic before making a decision. I mean, if you're not sure what you want to do, if that's going to help you wrestle that out, I suppose it's helpful. But it might be that if you just go and get a job and you know what, this isn't where I want to be, that's still useful information.
Of course.
Yes. So, certainly, if you want to do a master's, I don't want to put anyone off doing a master's. But I think if you can get a job doing what you want to do without one, you might as well.
So do you, because I've spent some time in the industry and I found I've learned so much quicker than I would have in an environment like college or university. So what was it like in masters? Was the rate of learning like being in a job, or was it more like being in university and you're following sort of this and that?
I mean, universities kind of always sort of say they want to teach you not to be spoon-fed and do stuff yourself. They're not actually necessarily all that good at doing it. Although I think the fourth year project I did, I was more or less left on my own. If I got stuck, I had a supervisor I could go to for help. I was sort of left on my own. I will admit, I wasn't particularly disciplined in how much work I got done when I was a student. So I probably could have done a lot more if I'd really put my mind to it. It was sort of largely, was it off my own back? I don't know. I mean, he was sort of giving me pointers saying, right, now you've got this bit done, this is probably the next thing you need to work on. How I then got there was up to me, but kind of the big milestones of like, what's the next thing you need to do for your project was kind of, he was giving me sort of pointers on that. Yes. Have I answered the question? I feel like I've rambled.
Oh, it's all right. But you found, did you find you learnt loads doing your masters?
Oh yeah, that. To a certain extent, yeah. I mean, I think because it was all quite low-level stuff, I learned some niche stuff about Linux mouse drivers, but I didn't learn a whole lot about programming in general. I think because I had already done a fair bit of programming, just kind of, in my own time, because I quite enjoyed it. But then also just getting something to the point where it actually works and it's debugged and it's not quite shippable as a sort of that kind of project, but actually working. It's always easy to get. There's always the cliche: the first 90% of the work takes 90% of the time. The last 10% takes the other 90% of the time, because finishing things off is always very hard. So there was a certain amount of having to do that, but at the same time, what I really need to do at the end was write up, "Hey, I've been doing this for years. Here's what I did." So I think it was quite a long time ago. I learned a huge amount about programming actually from doing that.
Yeah, okay. So, for example, someone in a more relevant field to what they want to do, they do a master's, you feel like they would learn loads if they applied themselves to a particular area that they want, or because from my point of view, I see masters as just lots of writing.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what it's like. So how about you talk about what a master's is like? Because you have told us about what you did as your project, but what is it actually like to do a master's? Do you do a lot of writing, or is it more project based? Does it depend on what you take? What masters you take?
Yeah, I mean, some subjects are going to require a much bigger dissertation than others. I mean, my sort of I did have to write, I forget how many thousand words about what I'd done, but it wasn't enormous by most people's standards. But I also then had to do an actual demo of the software as well.
Yeah.
So depending on what you're doing, that might not be a thing you can do. So the demo was a big part of the assessment bit. But what was I doing? Yeah, I mean, I was, in we call it a lab. It was basically an office with lots of computers in it. Hanging out with a bunch of PhD students who were sort of, and they also, it was quite interesting talking to those guys. They were doing all sorts of weird stuff. That was quite fun. And they sort of gave me the odd tip here and there as well. But going in and thinking, right, I need to do some software. Yes, I should write one program. And feeling a little bit, actually, a bit rudderless first. And once I sort of knew what I was doing, I was sort of into it. But yes, I did feel a bit kind of, I come here and I sit here and I type a little bit and not much seems to happen. Certainly at first. Yeah, but they might speak to me as a somewhat disorganized person rather than how master's degrees work. But I think they are, trying to let you do your own research and, force you to come up with something yourself, which is, it's a life skill, even if it's not going to get you a job as a particular job in a particular bit of the industry. Yeah.
And I guess that sort of research you talked about, has that been useful in your indie studio at all? Sort of those skills you got from that?
Yes, I mean, I've had to learn all kinds of things like shaders, how do they work, and all kinds of things. So yeah, being able to dig into documentation, find the right bit of Stack Overflow, put things together. I often find that when I'm coming to something like that, I'll try and learn it and bounce off it, probably twice. And the third time it'll go, oh yes, it's now clicked. And then it will make sense. So you have to sort of stick with things for a little while and sort of, they don't work, come back to them a bit later.
Yeah,
that's been my sort of learning approach to stuff that I really don't know anything about. It's a long way from coding a database. So yeah, I've had to learn all kinds of extra bits. I mean, being an indie has taught me all kinds of things about bits of game dev I haven't had to do before. It's taught me what producers do as well. If you're ever not sure what a producer does, go and be an indie and find out all the things that have to get done that you never knew about, that someone else was taking care of for you. It's remarkable. They're very useful people, even if you're never quite sure whether they're doing anything. Trust me, they are. But that's a slight tangent. Just want to big up producers because it turns out they're very useful. Yeah, but yes, learning how to pick up stuff I've never had to do anything, never had to use before, was certainly a big part of becoming an indie. And so having a bit of prior experience of that, I guess, has probably turned out to be handy.
Okay, so how about this? Say you never took your masters and you just finished uni, and then you went into JGEX and you went and started your indie studio, and you wanted to redo your masters, or no, just do a masters because you wouldn't have done it yet. how would you approach it now that you've had spent some time in the games industry? Would you approach it any differently if you were taking the same masters, for example, or a games industry focused mastered?
Yeah. I think I'd be much better at kind of specking out where I wanted to go up front and kind of working out, what kind of things could I do rather than just kind of sticking my finger in the air and, writing some code. So, I've had to get obviously used to, scoping out tasks, making milestones for myself, tracking issues, and that kind of thing, which, I've sort of picked up over the years from project managers and sort of seeing how sprint works and that kind of thing. Scrum is a thing, how sprints work. And yeah, so I'd be much more organized in how I was doing it, and I'd sort of come up, I'd be sort of looking ahead of time for like, what kind of things do I want to be ticking off? What are the areas I want to be hitting? Yeah, so I think I would make probably much better progress at this point, perhaps unsurprisingly.
Would you have taken a different master's if you had a choice?
At this stage, yeah, because I think I probably would want to do something games related, because I might as well at this point, I suppose. Yeah, and the whole sort of moving a mouse around was kind of cool. I look back at it now and think, so we're having £1 pointer in space that can move a mouse on any PC in the room. This is a privacy concern. Oh my goodness. I think we were a little bit more naive about it, 15, 20 years ago. Yes, I'm not quite sure I think this is a particularly useful endeavor to have been working on. It was kind of cool, but has various problems.
It does sound really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it genuinely, it's quite. It was very sort of Minority Report, waving your hand around in space and things moving, and it was very cool. But yeah, I think what would I do? I don't know. I mean, I mentioned this like doing some stuff with AI. I mean, actually, I do kind of find that stuff quite cool.
Yeah, AI is awesome.
Because it can really sell your game world. I mean, you can actually do a lot with. You can fake a lot of stuff up. Your AI doesn't actually need to be that intelligent for lots of different things. But yeah, if you can really nail it and things behave well, that can really make or break your system.
I guess you could sort of weave AI into your what you did for your masters and make it so the AI moves itself, so you could fight against a different mouse. I don't know. I'm just making things up now, but
I mean, machine learning to like anticipate what you want to do is a big growth area, and again, slightly creepy if you ask me. But there we go. But then, sort of, the other thing we wanted to do, that was something I remember. We wanted you to be able to drag a document and point it at a printer and let go and have the printer print it out. That was a cool thing we wanted to do. I didn't get that working, but that was kind of part of the dream. Because you have to sort of then tell the system where everything was in the room and, that kind of thing. But yeah, kind of anticipating what it is you're trying to do and reacting smartly to driving stuff around would be interesting.
Do you think you'd be able to do that now, as you've got all this experience?
Yeah, I mean, assuming I could. Yeah, I mean, I'd have to learn a load of low-level stuff like how do I send a document to a printer, but I'm sure I could do that. Yeah, I reckon I could get it working. I'd probably make much faster progress than I did as a somewhat lazy, whatever I was, 21-year-old. But yeah, there are a lot of moving parts. It's a very simple concept with a lot of things that have to go on behind the scenes for it to work. But yeah, I'm sure it could be done.
So, how about the more boring part of masters, the writing? How do you find that? What? Because I assume you just had to write up about your project. So, what was that like?
Yeah, I find that when I sit down to write a big chunk of text, sometimes my brain just goes, nope, I've lost the will to do this. We're just going to go blank. Not in like a writer's block kind of way, but in my brain just sort of shuts down. I really don't want to do it. But there we are. So it was a bit of a trial. I just had to force myself to, sit through it and get it done. Yeah, I mean, I had a set amount of practice on a smaller scale, kind of all through the degree. We'd had to do write-ups of projects and that kind of thing, just nothing quite that big. Yeah, so I didn't particularly enjoy it. But, it was a thing that had to be done.
Of course. And there's a lot of writing on university courses in general. Have you found any of your written work throughout the entirety of your university useful to you today? Not well, I guess you could take that from two sides. You could say, have you found the actual physical written work useful, or have you found the skills you picked up from writing useful at all?
I mean, being able to document stuff is a
Yeah.
skill all in itself, and it's very valuable. And so, a bit of practice in sort of writing down how a system works and in a way that someone else can understand, I think, is a very useful thing to be able to do. So I guess I did learn a bit of that. So like most other places, Jagex has a massive Confluence wiki internally where all kinds of stuff is written down, and some bits out of date. And I mean, code commenting is also useful. It's not quite the same kind of skill, but something else you want to sort of pick up. So being able to write, bits of stuff to make myself understood when writing technical information is a valuable thing.
Did you do any exams in your course?
Yeah, so the masters was 50% exams, 50% project work, and then assessed both of them and then gave you the lower grade for the two. So I didn't do well. I really didn't do well in the exams that year. So unfortunately, I didn't get a very good masters.
Okay. Well, let's just chat about whether you found whether you found the style of teaching useful, because there are a lot of games courses, which do a lot more project work in comparison to the more traditional like written work and exams. Do you think, if you were in charge of making every university course possible in games, how would you change them to make them the most beneficial to getting your foot in the games industry? Yeah, that's quite a big question.
That is a big question. I mean, I've done a couple of like lectures for students, but I don't really know how their courses are put together. But I know they do lots of project work, which they definitely should be. I think something I've always said to people, if they sort of say, how can I, get good at game dev? One thing I will say is always finish something, because making a quick prototype that kind of works, is useful. But actually trying to finish something so that it has, a menu and a control scheme that that's explained, and you've got most of the bugs out, and someone teaches you an awful lot that if you just kind of do the easy bits, you'll never learn. So making sure that students are taking on fairly chunky projects and making sure that they're really fleshed out into not just sort of game mechanic prototypes, but here's a whole game at some point. That has everything from a splash screen onwards, so that they've got the experience of the whole end-to-end process, and all the weird little things you only learn by doing that. You're not going to learn from some lecturer sitting you down and putting some PowerPoint on. So I think that would definitely be part of it. I mean, there's a place for lectures and explaining concepts and that kind of thing. But yes, practical is good.
Practical is really good. I agree with you there, because it's a bit like learning a code concept. When you come by something that you're not sure about, you watch a video on it and you're like, this sort of makes sense. But when you're actually doing it, when you're implementing it into a game or whatever you're doing, it helps you understanding it so much more, because you're taking action. So in my opinion, I don't think written work is that great. Maybe small written pieces, but big written documents that you have to submit for university work, you're not really learning loads. But do you have an opinion on that?
I think part of the problem the universities has is they need to be able to assess what you've learned as well. And so if the write-ups they might not be teaching you much, but if they help to produce an equitable, fair assessment of, what people have learned, that does have value. It's a bit like, I think exams aren't necessarily a great way of testing people, because can you remember this stuff that you clearly would just look up if it was important in this sort of 1 hour stretch? Isn't that useful? The only advantage they have is they're very easy to standardize for everybody. And so having something which gives you a sort of an equitable way for everyone to be assessed and work out, who's getting the first, who's getting the 2-2s or whatever, that does have value, even if it's that bit of it isn't teaching you as a student all that much. So I guess they have their place.
Yeah, you have a really good point there, actually. What else do I want to say? I've completely forgotten what I was going to say. All right then. So, in conclusion, do you think a masters are a yay or a nay?
I think if you want to do one, but don't look at it as a way of increasing your sort of opportunity to get into the industry. As I said, there may be one or two exceptions if it's really like niche and you know exactly what you want to do. But by and large, I would do a master's if you want to do a master's.
Yeah.
But don't worry about its impact on your career, I think.
Wonderful. Well, it was lovely speaking to you.
And you?
And I think that's everything from the Game Dev London podcast about masters and whether they're useful or not. Do you have anything else you want to add, Chris?
No, I think we've more or less covered it.
Great, cool. Well, you can follow Chris on his Twitter. Sorry, and that has been flashing on the screen throughout the podcast. So you can follow him there. And I think that's everything. Thank you for joining us on the Game Dev London podcast, and I hope you have a nice day. Bye.